In this episode, we're going to be talking about the history of the artist's wooden palette.
I'm Jessie. I've been a full-time artist for 10 years and thought it about time I start sharing my painting techniques and adventures. Subscribe to join me every week for a window into my art life.
So every artist uses a palette differently. I am so interested in the correlation between an artist's palette and their painting practice. This is mine. It's a wooden palette, kidney-shaped wooden palette. I got it as an art student 12 years ago in Florence at an amazing art shop called Zecchi, the oldest Italian art shop in Italy. And it's beautiful, it's lasted so well. It's mid-tone, which means that when you're painting on a mid-tone palette, you get a much truer representation of what the oils are going to be like on your painting. And so I was thinking about palettes, and then it got me thinking about how it affects my practice, like how a palette can change my painting, and if learning a bit more about it or finding different ways to use the palettes might enhance my painting. So I bought this beautiful new palette, which is a little bit bigger than my kidney palette. Again, it just hugs your body and your arm here, really easy grip. It will not stay this clean for very long. But when I was looking at the history, like the pictorial evidence of artists and their palettes, each is unique to the artist, but every artist has one thing in common, and that's that they use these beautiful palettes as motifs and symbols of the fact that they are artists and this is the tools of their trade. This is probably closest to Elizabeth Le Brun's palette, which was so clean and jewel-like. The blobs of paint looked like gems, like they should be jewels on her dress. It was quite hard to find any written information about palettes. There was an interesting photographer in 2007, Matthias Schaller. He has been researching the inner workings of the artist's palette and the artist's studio and photographing these amazing palettes from Turner, Kandinsky, Degas, Monet, and then looking at their paintings and seeing if you can see like the personality of the artist right there on the palette. Now, Van Gogh in 1887 was amazing for this because he actually painted his self-portrait with his palette exactly like it was, like as messy and all the brush marks right in the middle of the wood. And I found that really interesting. So I wanted to look more into that. And I was researching how different artists use their palettes in portraiture in history, right back to the Renaissance with Hans Boll, showing that yes, they are artists and they're very precious with their paints in history. They weren't as lucky as we are now that we can use as much paint as we like and not worry about it. They were really preserving their paints. So I ordered a very cheap wooden palette. Wasn't expecting it to be this small, but it's not exactly mid-tone. It's far too light. So I'm going to actually varnish this and give it a really traditional umber ivory black varnish, and just show you how you can do this at home as well if your palette isn't really giving you a true representation of your paints. What I'm going to do is, you can use raw umber, but I've just got some ivory black and English red paint. I'm going to mix this on the wooden palette and then basically just give it a nice stain really quick and easy. And then I can get painting on it. So yeah, it's just to give it a nice rich base. You don't need much paint. Again, if you've got any umbers or just browns lying around, I'm just going to mix that in. Just like a nice rich brown. If I've got a dry rag anywhere, I'm just going to then, with some linseed oil, just gonna rub a little bit in. And then just stain the palette. Okay, so already you can see from just this one coat of stain the difference in tone for the palette. Now this colour of umber is actually much closer to what palettes looked like in history. The self-portraiture we see from Mary Beale, for example, has a palette very similar to this, or Rembrandt's, or Picasso's. A particular favourite is Artemisia Gentileschi's self-portrait as the allegory of painting, where the symbol of the palette is literally the symbol for painting itself. And this is the kind of colour you have on the palettes. So if you do want to just find yourself a palette, or you're not happy with the palette you have, just a simple stain is a great way to rectify that. Okay, wooden palettes, after all of this, still might not be for you. So you can use glass palettes as, I think, the next best thing. Actually, a lot of people prefer glass. I find it a bit too difficult when I'm moving studios or painting outside plein air. But yeah, try glass as well. It's a really good option. Or ceramic palettes, stay wet palettes if you're an acrylic painter. Tearaway palettes are another one you can use. After every use, you can literally just pull off the layer you're using and you have a clean palette ready for your next painting session, although not very environmentally friendly. So one thing to remember about the artist's wooden palette that often puts people off using them is that they can be quite high maintenance to keep clean and keep in a good condition for painting. So what you want to do after every use is scrape off the paint you're no longer using. And then with a rag and some linseed oil, you just want to saturate the pores of the wood with the oil, which means that the surface stays really hydrated and the wood won't over time dry out and then start to extract the oils from your paint, which has happened to me a few times. So thanks for watching, I hope you found that interesting. Next week I'm going to be making an artist's wooden palette from scratch, which should be interesting since I'm really bad at DIY and I have very little experience. So if I can make it, hopefully you can as well. Until then, click the like button and the subscribe button, wherever that is, and yeah, see you next week.